So, hello everybody, welcome to Data in Play. I'm Andrew from Ambition Group, and this is the mini-series that gives you an insight into how data is harnessed by some of the world's biggest sports teams and brands. And joining me today is Alexander Booth, who is Assistant Director of Research and Development for the Texas Rangers over in the United States. Alexander, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, it's my pleasure. Thank you for bringing me on.
You're more than welcome. This, just for everybody at home and listening to this episode is going to really focus on data analytics in the context of kind of gaining advantages in sport on the field. So that's kind of where we're going to go with this particular conversation. But firstly, Alexander, like I said, over to you first, because, let's set the scene. So what does the Assistant Director of Research and Development do for the Texas Rangers?
Yes, definitely. So good morning, good evening, wherever you're watching this from. Yeah, my name is Alexander Booth. I'm the Assistant Director of Research and Development for the Texas Rangers. I've been with the team for 6 years now. This is my 6th season with the team. We measure time in seasons as opposed to years when we work in sports. So I've been with the Rangers through a lot of transition in terms of how we compete with data and analytics. When I first joined the team back in 2018, I was one of the first people hired on their analytics team. And that was kind of this nascent team, and we were still trying to figure out how we could get a competitive advantage with kind of these numbers and analytics. So I've kind of led the team through all of our data architecture changes, going and migrating to the cloud, building out our machine learning models. And then as our team has grown from when I joined, it was a team of maybe 3 or 4 people, and now it's a team of over 20. How can we kind of implement these really good kind of DevOps, MLOps, and CI/CD kind of best practices in data and analytics to kind of get everyone's opinions, everyone's analytics, everyone's recommendations down to the field in a effective way as possible. Communication is going to be a big key in kind of our talk today, I expect too.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you're a Rangers fan, aren't you, as well, which must be a nice thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So where I'm from, the Rangers, we're actually headquartered in Texas. That's kind of where we play. That's our home stadium. And yeah, I grew up here and I was a Rangers fan growing up. So I remember going to games with my dad and kind of watching kind of the baseball games and having posters of all the famous players on my wall. And then being able to be and being able to play with or being able to be a part of that team and being able to kind of live that childhood dream was definitely it's amazing. I still get chills walking into the stadium every single day. But
Yeah,
yeah,
no, I bet.
yeah, I didn't actually start out working for the Rangers. After I got my kind of master's in data science, I was working for a company up in Chicago, dabbling in kind of selling and doing analytics, machine learning on kind of websites and getting more kind of clicks and all that good stuff. And then I was working for some startups as well. But I've always had this passion for sports analytics. And so I was keeping a blog at the time and writing up my own analysis of kind of Rangers players and doing some innovative thinking and innovative Bayesian modeling. And when I applied to the Rangers and saw an opening, it was just, I was at the right place at the right time. So I'm definitely very fortunate and grateful to kind of have this opportunity.
Yeah, and do you manage to get to the game still, then, or is it strictly kind of is it your workplace now?
Yeah, so I definitely went to way more games when I started originally. Now I actually have a family and a small child of my own who I'm taking to games now, kind of bringing that full circle back to my own story with my father, my son, yeah. But I still make it out to a few games every year. And of course, we have afternoon games sometimes. So we actually have games happen while we're in our 9 to 5 job. And so it's pretty fun to be able to just go down from the office and sit in the seats and take in a big league game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It sounds fantastic, and like I said, it must be such an honor and a privilege to be not only kind of a fan of who you are, but also to work there as well. It must just be a dream every day to kind of go into work and to work for your favorite team and to play such a crucial role as well in kind of their success, kind of on and off the field, I guess. And then we'll talk about kind of how and the different ways you do that a bit later on. But like I said at the start, we're going to really look at the kind of how you guys will harness that data to be able to gain advantages and that type of thing over other teams, right? So how would you kind of describe your approach to using data to gain that competitive advantage in baseball?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think data and competitive advantage and data-driven decision making has all started with the advent of Moneyball. So Moneyball was this pretty impactful book and movie kind of in the early 2000s, where the Oakland Athletics, typically a small market team, So unlike some sports, there's no salary cap in baseball. So some teams spend a lot of money and some teams don't spend a lot of money. And so that disparity in budget also kind of creates the disparity on the field in terms of kind of a product. So the Oakland A's have a small budget. They don't spend a lot of money. So they're trying to figure out how they can still be good without necessarily signing the best players. So this whole Moneyball idea was that they found a metric, a KPI that was definitely correlated to runs. They figured out that on base percentage was a better way to evaluate players. No other team was doing that. So by targeting players with this high on base percentage, they were able to create a market inefficiency, I guess. They're able to kind of optimize off of that. So they created a good team on their small budget. And that kind of approach has led to kind of the innovations today, except now all of the teams are working with the same data and all the teams are trying to come up with that small edge. So for us at the Texas Rangers, our approach to using data to get a competitive advantage really is circled around two things: processes and communication. So we want to be able to optimize a lot of our processes to be able to be more efficient. We want as much analytics, as much models to be kind of created as possible. We want to be able to organize everything through kind of DevOps, GitHub, machine learning registry. There's so many more data sources being created in baseball every year. For example, this year, we now have a new data source called weather data. We are getting the wind speed, humidity, temperature, pressure every 5 seconds during a game, which is a lot of data that we're starting to deal with now. But luckily for us, we already have kind of those processes established that ingesting kind of a new data source, even a new big data source, and we can talk about big data later as well, is relatively seamless. And our team, as our team continues to grow, their impact becomes more efficient as well. And our second one there was communication. So we think that even if all the teams in baseball are kind of making models off of the same like underlying data set, there's still a competitive advantage in being able to get those insights from the data from the analysts in the office to actually being implemented on the field, whether that's on the field at our major league team or kind of on the backfields of our minor league teams and working on player development, increasing kind of the optimization of how our amateur, high school and college draft players are doing in the minor league. So we think that communication is a big part. Again, a lot of these athletes and coaches, they didn't necessarily grow up in this data world, right? They're not actually getting their degrees in machine learning or anything. So being able to communicate to them how they can, with these numbers and why these numbers and recommendations are important, is a huge part of our job as well. And I think that we at the Texas Rangers do a very good job in that data communication to our stakeholders, or in our case, the athletes and coaches. And I think that some other clubs don't necessarily have that. And again, that's a competitive advantage. If we can find the numbers, we say, hey, I need you to drop your arm, I need you to change your grip a little bit, and being able to get that change to be enacted, right? I think it's something really interesting in analytics in general. So I also worked in analytics in industry before the Texas Rangers. It's a pretty common thing. Like you can come up with a recommendation, hey, buy this stock, sell this, do this change on the website. Here's how you can get more clicks. But there's always some bureaucracy with it. There's always some kind of red tape that you necessarily need to get through to be able to implement that, whether it's communication to stakeholders, whether it's communication to a different team, right? You have to get some collaboration to get that analytics decision to be actually implemented. So that's something that we take we identify as a potential competitive advantage area at the Rangers. And so we go very all in on dashboards and interactivity and questions and answers. Like if an athlete asks a question, we pursue it. We're like, yes, please continue that curiosity. Like we want to help you and we want to kind of be there for you and be that resource and to make you better.
Yeah, and it makes total sense about why you would look at so many different data points, I guess, to be able to identify that advantage, because those super fine margins can be the difference between winning games, winning championships, or losing, right? So it makes total sense to really zoom in on those and to find different ways and different advantages that you can get over your opponent, and that makes total sense. And the question that I wanted to ask you about those kind of data points, because there's so many, you mentioned quite a few there, is how do you sort of identify and prioritize the most important ones to the Rangers?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point. And I think that For us at the Rangers, it depends on kind of where our or how well our team is doing. If that kind of, we'll get into some details on that. So for the last couple of years, our team has not been performing very well. We were kind of near the bottom of the division in baseball. We weren't doing too well. So in that case, instead of focusing a lot of our data points and prioritizing data for the major league team, what we were doing was prioritizing the development of our younger players, working at our minor league system and working at our development lab and all of our other facilities. We want to make these young guys to be peak performance, to be able to get them to be as optimal as possible so they can impact and benefit the major league club. So then fast forward to this year, we actually are pretty good this year. We're actually in first place in the division now, maybe due to the data-driven decisions. We'll never know.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, so in this case, our data points have changed in priority. We definitely need to now invest heavily in optimizing our major league team, understanding kind of the team we're playing that night, being able to optimize our decisions to get them out, to produce runs, etc. And the other one that we're doing now is what's called injury prevention using kind of biomechanics. So with the major league club, you're only as good as the players you're putting on the field. And unfortunately, in baseball, baseball is a 6-month sport. It takes the 162 games. It's a marathon. And being able to play as many of those games as possible is an advantage as well. So in baseball right now, we have some of the best pitchers, some of the best hitters in the game, and we want them to be able to play as much as they can. So being able to optimize how they move, being able to optimize how they throw a baseball 100 miles an hour, being able to optimize how they swing the bats and run, right? That can keep them on the field by preventing injuries. So we're actually looking now at a bunch of pose analytics data. So we can look exactly at how the skeleton is performing when a pitcher is throwing. And again, the reason there is to try and identify movements that may be ineffective or then may lead or signal to fatigue or potential injury. If you're about to throw out your elbow or pull a hamstring, we can actually see that there's a progression in kind of how your movement decays before that injury could occur. So we're trying to get ahead of that, identify that, maybe take a player out, give them some additional rest, because we want them to not necessarily have to go on a 2-week injured list or miss a month of the season, because that can really impact our playoff chances.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that it sounds so cool in terms of how on the cutting edge of it all you guys are with in terms of sort of looking at these analytics in such detail, right? And, even if that comes down to, I don't know, a pitcher's kind of height of arm or one of your hitters standing in a certain pose or a certain stance, whatever, and that can really make a difference, I guess. And, I think certainly for me, I'm not sure about the people listening to this, but I never really thought about the sheer amount of kind of analytics and the work and the data that kind of goes on behind the scenes that you will be able to kind of feed back into the coaches and into the players. I'm sure we'll discuss that a little later on as well. But in terms of how much kind of work that goes on and kind of the level of detail as well that you guys really look at and really identify. And, we touched upon there, the kind of different data points, and you touched upon the weather as well, as was one of them. So what kind of methods would you have in place then to ensure that the data is valid and it's accurate? Because if it's not valid and accurate, then it's kind of problematic, right? Especially when you are feeding it back to coaches and feeding it back to players and the team in general. So yeah, how do you make sure it is valid and it's accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually goes back to the explosion of kind of new data sources in baseball right now as well. So yeah, we track lots of things. Not only do we just track kind of what happens during a game, but as you can expect, we track the baseball. We're able to track the players. We have cameras tracking everything at hundreds of frames per second that we can then turn into kind of analytics. But one of the big kind of data sources and foundational data sources in modern baseball analytics is baseball tracking. So we track how the ball spins, and we also track how the ball moves in the air. And then we can also track exactly kind of where it goes on the field. So this technology was only limited to major league teams. It was pretty expensive to kind of create a radar system to track that. But in the last handful of years, this has become a more, there's been the cheaper versions of this that's been made available to all. So what this means is that we now have high schools, we now have colleges, we now have like little league games. We also have international data now. We have data coming from Venezuela, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, the Czech Republic, England, actually, Japan, Korea, Taiwan. There's a bunch of data coming in from the international scene as well. And so the thing that we've actually found is that these tracking systems from all of these disparate places, as well as these levels of competition from the amateur to the international side, they're not standardized. These systems aren't standardized. So it's sometimes hard to kind of get trustworthy measurements. You see sometimes like, oh, this pitch was thrown at 200 miles an hour, which is physically impossible, or this baseball was hit like 500 feet, or like 1,000 feet, which is also is physically impossible. So we definitely have systems in place to kind of process that. And the way we do that is by looking for outliers. We kind of have this distribution. Okay, we know that the average baseball, the average fastball is thrown between like 85 and 100 miles an hour. So plus or minus a couple standard deviations. So if we see pitches that are tracked that exceeds those distributions, then we can immediately have them flagged for further processing. Further, we also have machine learning models in place that we do to try and standardize everything. Again, the idea is to compare apples to apples, right? I want to be able to compare a guy in Japan to a guy in the UK to a guy in college at Vanderbilt. And the way to do that is what we use machine learning models to basically create adjustments to compare these systems. Sometimes, like I said, there's many balls tracking systems now. So we try to convert them all to a single scale to then allow for those comparisons. So again, doing that quality assurance is really important to us. You don't want to kind of make a recommendation off of faulty data. The models that you create, the recommendations and KPIs that you act on are only as good as the raw data coming into that. And so with big data, you have to have some automated processes to be able to clean that data, to be able to flag those quality assurance, to be able to flag bad pitches. And I think that is an area, like I said at the beginning, that can create a competitive advantage. If we're one of the few clubs that can have this efficiency for kind of big data quality assurance, then that's an advantage for sure. It gives us more confidence in our recommendations.
Yeah, and I suppose, those recommendations have got to be correct, right? When you are going to coaches and to players, because someone's going to get in trouble, right? So, how would you usually kind of involve the players and the coach in the analysis? So, you've got all that data and you're happy with it. What would be the next step in terms of involving players and coaches in that analysis section?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like we said, we have the recommendation. Hey, I think you should throw your slider more often. Hey, I think you should change your release angle or adjust kind of how your hips are looking when you swing. So how can we kind of get that recommendation to the player, right? There's also during a game too. We tell our players where they should expect baseballs coming down the middle, or if this pitcher is going to throw the baseball more on the edge, or if they're going to throw a curveball or more. So one of the ways that we typically do this is we actually have an analyst or multiple analysts now in the dugout during games. We also have them hanging out with players before the game. We generate what's called kind of an advance report. We basically have a whole kind of recommendation, a dashboard of all the players and all the even the umpires that we're going to be playing against that night. And we go through that. We look at these graphs, we look at these heat maps, and we say, okay, when you face against Justin Verlander tonight, he's going to throw you fastballs down the middle. When you face Clayton Kershaw, he's going to be throwing you breaking balls kind of at the bottom of the zone. And so that prepares our hitters to know what to expect when they're at the plate, so they're not going in completely blind. One way that the players really get buy-in to is by watching video, being able to kind of see the numbers, see the data come in, and then be able to kind of look at that by a video stream as well, really creates that buy-in. Again, being able to see kind of the action on the field is what creates that buy-in. If we say, okay, we want you to throw more sliders, and here's why, and then we want your slider to look like Clayton Kershaw's slider, and then we show video of how good his slider is, then the player goes, oh, you know what? It would be kind of cool if I could throw a pitch like that, right? Or same thing with kind of another big one we have is positioning. We want to position our infielders and outfielders as a defense the most optimally, the way that we can get the other players out. And so one way we can encourage that buy-in to say, hey, I want you to stand 2 feet off of second base whenever this player is at the plate, is by looking at their video and say, all right, look, here's 10 videos. And in all of them, this player is hitting the ball right at second base. So if you stand at second base, you're likely going to be able to make the play and get him out. And again, just being able to get that via like a spray chart, a visualization of video really helps get that buy-in. And the last thing I'll mention there too is the coaches. So the coaching aspect in baseball has definitely shifted over the last decade or so. Now, before you would have this idea of like old school versus kind of new age and analytics coaches. And the old school coaches are doing everything by gut and feel like I don't know, get your elbow up more, and they're just watching and telling you that. But a lot of coaches now are actually analytically driven. They've realized that the way that the game has changed, and they've also realized the way that analytics can help kind of their gut feel. We don't want the analytics to necessarily replace kind of our domain experts, right? Our coaches, our scouts, our domain experts, they've been around the game forever. But where it really helps is complementing them. So maybe the coach says, "Hey, I think you need to raise your elbow up more before you swing." We can now actually look at the numbers and actually look at our skeleton data, our pose data, and be like, yeah, we agree. If you do raise your elbow up, you're more likely to get an extra 2 miles an hour on your swing as you kind of rotate. So we encourage this change as well. So now it's almost a harmony. So the coaches bring ideas to us, and just as often as we bring ideas to the coaches to be able to figure out how to optimize and make our players better. And I kind of love that synergy.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point that you make, because I think in lots of other sports, I think it can be a really kind of big sort of talking point between kind of and the analytics teams and the coaches, and some coaches potentially sort of set in their ways of kind of old traditional coaching techniques and methods compared to the kind of the modern way of sport, which is all about data, right, and analytics. So I think that, like you said, to get that synergy, to get that buy-in is super important. I think that outside of the world of sport, the buy-in for people when it comes to data analytics is one of the biggest sort of one of the biggest hurdles that we've got, right? So being able to visualize that data and to be able to say to a player or a coach and say, look, this is what the analytics are showing, this is what the data is showing. And I think that's such an amazing kind of thing to be able to do, and the impact that you have on that team must be so rewarding to think, well, we've just won X number of games this season because of our work and our research that's gone behind the scenes.
Yeah, definitely. We think that it's super impactful to see that. I was doing some work with some on our player development side and being able to kind of make those recommendations and then see that these guys are now actually performing better is really, really fulfilling, I would say.
Yeah,
And yeah, of course,
absolutely.
now that we're not necessarily good at baseball, but now the fact that we're winning we're top of the division right now is also really exciting. We haven't been in first place for the last like 3 or 4 years. So being able to get that change again, it's a good energy. And of
Yeah.
course, that's also helping to the buy-in as well. As if you're winning, you can't really do anything wrong, right? So
Yeah. Well, it shows the work you're doing is obviously having an impact, right? It's having an effect, which is great to see. And we've kind of touched upon it a little bit the start of the episode. But why do you think that kind of utilization of data and insights in sport is so important?
yeah, definitely. I think that all sports are now starting to compete on analytics. That's kind of the term that we're using kind of in the industry. So the NBA, the NHL, the NFL, obviously soccer, football. There's lots of and motorsport, right? Formula One has so many data feeds coming off of it now. I think kind of one of the big ideas is that not that if you're not kind of doing what everyone else is doing, then you're going to be left behind. But I think with analytics, there's been this proven history of how recommendations via data and quantitative numbers can provide a difference. And that difference you also have confidence in, right? Because it's coming from the numbers, it's coming from the models, it's coming from the KPIs. And like I said earlier, back in the day, you're necessarily focused only on your gut instinct or your feel, right? Your domain expertise. And so even that this transcends like obviously just baseball, but across like all industries as well. So having additional confidence in your decision is what is so powerful, right? So this goes back to this data-driven decision as opposed to necessarily a gut feel decision.
Mm.
And that is so important in sports today because when we make decisions, they're high level, they're high impact decisions. If I'm signing a player, if I'm spending $50 million on a guy for making a trade, right? These are huge financial costs, but also hugely impactful to fans, right? We have thousands and thousands, millions of fans around the world that are engaging with the team as well. And we want kind of our decisions to benefit them. At the Texas Rangers, our goal is to win a World Series, point blank. That's it. We want to win we want to win it all. And so every decision that we make needs to further that that goal, right, to progress there.
Yeah.
And so being able to, like I said, having that confidence in the decisions that you make is what's impactful, and data provides that confidence.
Yeah, and I think that we've touched upon so many fascinating topics throughout this kind of episode, and I'm so pleased and appreciative that you've been able to kind of join us. But the last question that I've got for you really is one that I'm going to ask every guest that appears on this mini series. But for you, what is the biggest takeaway that you'd like the audience to bring away from this episode today?
Yeah, I would definitely say that try looking at the next sport that you watch through kind of a different lens. Maybe look at it through kind of this data-driven decision lens or analytic lens. In baseball, for example, it's every pitch is essentially a microcosm of this data-driven decision. So in baseball, it's easy to miss a pitch sometimes. They're throwing the ball, they hit the ball, or they just strike out, and the same thing over and over and over. But it's not. In baseball, every pitch is a decision. I want to throw what type of pitch, a fastball, a slider, a curveball. Where do I want to throw it? And the batter is saying, do I want to swing at this? How do I want to swing at it? Do I want to swing up? Do I want to swing flat? And then you have to decide, yes, I'm going to make a swing. Yes, I'm going to throw the curveball to the left-hand corner of the plate, right? And then it's in play, and then they have to figure, okay, I'm the second baseman, I'm going to make the play. Like, no, the shortstop's going to do it, and then we have to throw it in, right? And so every single aspect in sports is a decision, and being able to kind of see the data that's underpinning that. Again, everything in sports now is essentially tracked. Players, balls, you name it, they're tracking it. There's this whole world of big data in sports, and there's all of these people and very intelligent, smart people that I work with that are making these decisions behind the scenes to be able to kind of make and optimize that data use case. So I think, yeah, the biggest takeaway, I think that there's more data than you know out there that's being tracked in sports, and there's way more decisions being made in sports. And I think if you look through kind of that lens of like, wow, like why did he make that pass? Why did he make that shot on goal? Or like, why are they setting up in this formation? If you start having that curiosity, asking the questions around sport, then I think that kind of natural sense of it's like to me, it's like it's awesome. It's like a wonder. I'm like, this is crazy that there's so many things happening in kind of this game right now. It's not just a game anymore. It's like this game of numbers too, in a sense. But I definitely would say, yeah, take that away. I would think, yeah, just imagine the data happening behind the scenes and the data-driven decisions happening on the field, and everything is happening for some reason, right? That's been established before the game or match even started.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, Alexander, thank you so much for joining us. You've been fantastic, and I'm sure the audience at home will absolutely love listening to this back and kind of hearing a bit more about it from your side of things. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No problem.